So as I said in my introduction video, coming from a country where we have very low gun ownership rates as well as a very low gun crime rate, I am a completely biased proponent of gun control. But I do acknowledge that what works for New Zealand won't necessarily work for America. What concerns me about the gun situation here is the lack of constructive discussion around it, that everyone seems to have their sides and there's no way of coming to any sort of compromise. What bothers me about many gun control opponents is not so much their opinion itself as it is the arguments that they use to get to that opinion. So I'm going to be looking at a few of the arguments that are inevitably put forth by gun control opponents in any argument on the subject. Yes, your right to own a gun is protected by the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment. For those of you unfamiliar with the word amendment outside of it being what all of those additions to the Constitution are called, let's take a look at that. So an amendment is a minor change in a document or a change or addition to a legal or statutory document. The only reason the Second Amendment exists in the first place is because of the ability to make changes to the Constitution. Now, before you argue that an amendment can't change something that's already in the Constitution, let's have a look at what the Constitution itself has to say about it. Article 5 of the Constitution of the United States talks about amendments. The first part explains the process for adding an amendment, which shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of the Constitution. After describing the process, Article 5 reads, "No amendment which may be made prior to the year 1808 shall in any manner affect the first and fourth clauses in the 9th section of the first article, and that no state without its consent shall be deprived of its equal suffrage in the Senate." So the Constitution is very specific about what can't be affected by amendments, and most of that isn't even relevant anymore because we are way past the year 1808. The only thing that cannot be affected by an amendment is that no state without its consent shall be deprived of its equal suffrage in the Senate. When the Constitution was written, they knew that the world was going to change and that they couldn't predict what would be best for America in the future. I'm sure that they had no idea what kind of weapons would become available. So they even specifically put a stipulation in the Constitution to allow for America to adapt along with the changing world. So saying it's my constitutional right is a perfectly valid argument for why you are currently allowed to own a gun. It is not an argument against adding another amendment to the Constitution that might clarify and restrict the Second Amendment. If you really believe that everybody having easy access to guns is the best thing for America, then don't be afraid to put aside the Constitution for a moment and start arguing based on statistics and examples. Because if you can't do that, all you're showing is that you're afraid of the facts because they just might prove you wrong. I actually agree with this one, 100%. That's why I don't believe in background checks for guns. I do believe in background checks for people who want to buy guns. I believe in training for people who want to buy guns. And I believe that every single gun in the country should be registered to a person so that when a gun is involved in a crime, it can be more easily traced back to the person responsible. That way, fewer innocent guns will have to take the blame for crimes committed by people. When gun rights lobbyists are asked to give evidence supporting their opinion, they frequently point to Chicago, which has the strictest gun laws in the country and an awful lot of people getting shot. Not counting Washington, D.C., Illinois is the only state that doesn't allow concealed carry of guns. Illinois residents must have a firearm owner's identification card, and there's a waiting period between purchasing a gun and actually being allowed to possess it. And that's just Illinois as a whole. In Chicago, gun owners must have a permit which requires a training course. They may only have one gun in a usable state at any given time, All guns must be kept inside the house, not even in a garage or anything. Guns must all be registered, and some firearms are banned completely. Now, if gun control worked, these laws should be completely effective, because if I'm going to go out and shoot somebody, I'm going to think twice, because I don't want to get in trouble for taking my gun outside of my house. You know, on top of that whole murder thing. And if I went to Indiana to buy an unregistered gun, it's not like I could just bring it back to Chicago without registering it. Oh wait. Yeah, I could. The people who are the reasons for wanting stricter gun control are already committing crimes. A few laws regarding possession aren't going to deter them. The only way to make a difference is to regulate the purchase of guns and to regulate it across the entire country. If you want an example of how successful gun control can be, you can't just look at one city. You have to look at an entire country, which of course means looking outside of America. Now, I know America is a great country. You are taught that America is the best country in the world, so sometimes it doesn't even occur to you that other countries might be doing something better than America. But maybe looking at examples of other countries could actually make your country even better. The most famous example of successful gun control is Australia. I'm going to post some links to some pretty awesome videos on that, but basically in 1996, after a massacre, the country enforced a gun buyback, and they haven't had a massacre since. That's 17 years without a massacre. Now, I'm a Kiwi. Far be it from me to ever needlessly compliment Australia, but for a country of its size, that's pretty impressive. Australia's population is only a fraction of the state's, but it's a better example of how national gun control might work than looking at one city in the middle of a country with very relaxed gun laws. When gun rights lobbyists do talk about other countries, it's always Switzerland, where the gun ownership rate is very high and the gun crime rate is very low. Switzerland is a country that, like America, gained its independence in a war, so it has a proud history of gun use, just as America does. The difference is that Switzerland doesn't have an organized army. Its army is its citizens, so there's a strong culture of responsible, knowledgeable gun use that's passed down through the generations that's simply not a part of American culture as a whole. There's also a much stronger culture of individualism in America than there is in Switzerland. This means that the Swiss are more likely to think in collective terms and therefore have a stronger sense of civic and social responsibility. America is much more on par with Australia in this regard, so while I don't think that we can look at Australia and say, yes, it's going to work exactly the same in the States, I do think that culturally Australia is a far better comparison than Switzerland. I'm not saying that I think America should do exactly the same thing as Australia. I just think that it's worth looking into, because if you genuinely care about your country and care about your fellow compatriots, then you'll take all of the evidence into account when trying to decide what the best course of action is. Wouldn't it be better if there was nothing to defend your family against? If you have kids, and hopefully even if you don't, you probably keep your guns in a safe place. So let's say some crazed maniac breaks into your house threatening to kill you and your family. Are you gonna say, hang on a minute, let me go and grab my gun so we can make this a fair fight? I don't think so. Okay, that was unfair of me. I'm sure that's not the scenario you imagine. The truth is that guns have been used in situations of self-defense. Not as many as the NRA would have you believe, but often enough. And in most of those situations, the gun doesn't even need to be fired for it to be effective. In 2010, there were 230 justifiable gun homicides by private citizens and 8,275 criminal gun homicides. 230 saved lives sounds pretty good, and even though I'm sure that the actual number is a bit lower than that, because just because a homicide was ruled justifiable doesn't mean that there was actually intent to kill on the part of the person who was shot, I'm sure that it's still a significant number. That still leaves us with the much greater number of 8,275 criminal homicides. The fact is that there are several situations where a gun just isn't a good defense against another gun. The criminal gunman knows what he's going to do, so he has a head start on the situation. If he's planning to shoot someone, chances are he's going to shoot them before any law-abiding gun holders even realize what's happening. So really, guns are more likely to be effective in a situation where the criminal isn't actually intending to shoot anyone. In the case of a massacre, it is of course true that if there is a law-abiding gun holder around, the criminal probably isn't going to shoot as many people as he otherwise would. But people will still be killed. People who commit massacres are typically suicidal and basically want to go out with as many bags as they can. So knowing that people are more likely to have a gun isn't likely to deter them. It might be a bit of a bummer because he can't kill as many people as he wanted to, but he's still going to get as many people as he can. And particularly in a case where there are children around, even if the gunman gets taken down early, it's still going to be a severely traumatizing experience. Isn't it better for everyone if we can figure out some way to prevent the gunman from getting a gun in the first place? I don't know what the best course of action is for gun laws in America. I do know that for a first world country, America's statistics on gun crime are appalling. Something needs to be changed, and it needs to be consistent nationwide for it to have any real effect. Unfortunately, as long as people are so afraid of losing their guns that they won't even concede to a point like background checks, and as long as the government is too afraid of those people to go against them, nothing will change. Your guns will win, your Second Amendment will win, and your people will continue to die. I don't understand how that's something you could possibly be proud of. Thank you for watching. Please do respond either in the comments or with a video. As long as your response is intelligent and thoughtful, I will take it into consideration no matter what your view is. Thanks again. Bye.